Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone. So, my name is Hitesh. I am a graphic designer and a design lead at idea.org. And I'm here today with Celeste. Celeste, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Celestine Njuguna. I am a program lead at ideo.org, so a colleague of Hitesh, but I'm based in the Nairobi studio. And so I sit at the intersection of design and implementation, really making sure that we implement amazing projects, products, and services that really meet people where they are. So, really excited to be here, looking forward to an engaging conversation.
Thank you, Celeste. Yes. So today, as Celeste said, we are excited to talk to you guys about gender and how it intersects with design and innovation. I think before we get into even like some of the things, I just want to share something vulnerable that we are also on a learning journey when it comes to gender. We are all learning, like as in our every project that we do, we learn something new about how to design for gender better. And what we will talk with you guys today is what our learnings have been and what we have learned so far. So we would love to use the knowledge of the group here to give us like your critique, give us like what else can be improved here. So this is really like a learning group. Think of this as a learning circle, and like do let us know if there's anything that we can push in terms of thinking and drive the work forward for better gender outcomes. So yeah, with that caveat, welcome everyone. The workshop today we are calling it's Design for Her Power, tools to make solutions more gender intentional. So the goal, sorry, I'm gonna make it full screen. And forgive me if I stammer a little, I get nervous around public speaking a little. All right. So today's goal is to really start finding and practicing our gender muscle, and surface any potential blind spots and address that early in our project. So it's really like when we say gender muscle, it's like all of us have experience of us, with uh, all of us have an experience of us being men, women, or people of all different identities, and we have our own personal experiences that we bring to the table when we are working with others, when we're designing things. So how do we start actually being more aware of how does gender show up in design, in our own personal experience? How are we bringing that to the table, and how are we designing that actively? So practicing that over time really like starts to strengthen like the muscle, as as you guys do in workouts at gym. So yeah, so that's why we're calling a gender muscle. So the agenda of our session, it's a very short session. It's going to be, I think, 50 minutes now. And we have a small creative warm-up for you guys. So please stay in front of your computers or your phones or wherever you're accessing, and we'll put you guys to work. And we would love some inputs from you. Then we will go into some like foundational knowledge that is required for gender. So like some real like key concepts that we will walk through, and then we will start working out. We'll find our muscle. We'll walk through an example, and we will then actually experience a tool that framework to actually think about as a group, like how can we make design solutions and innovation more gender transformative. So that's the plan for today. I will pass this baton to Celeste to take us away.
Thank you, Hitesh. And so, before we begin just getting into the meat of the conversation and the discussion, we wanted to take this time to really set some foundations and set some of the terms and concepts and even some controversies around gender. And because we know there are so many different perspectives and different ideas around gender, it can get complicated. And so, because it's complicated, we want to encourage you to bring in your perspective. Because gender is personal, everybody has experience because of our lived experience. So, whether or not you're male, you're female, whatever the case may be, come in and just weigh in. And also, as we're beginning this conversation, we're not really looking at gender as the outcome, but really how do we get to us being gender transformative or gender sensitive in our design. And so we are thinking about, how do we make decisions? How do we resource for projects? How do we make sure we're bringing in the right people in the conversations so that we're making sure that we're having their perspectives very early on? And as the IDEO team is guiding this conversation, this is an open space, it's a free space, it's a brave space. So bring in your voice. All voices are welcome. So karibuni sana, as we say in Nairobi, which means welcome in Swahili. So Hitesh, next slide, please. So at ideo.org, we are famed for our warm-ups. And so I hope this lives up to our expectations or your expectations. So we're going to do a creative warm-up. And I want you to go back to a time, maybe you were in your childhood, maybe in your teenage years, or maybe it was just last week. And think about or share a memory of a time where you were discouraged or completely prevented from doing something because of your gender. And so Hitesh is going to drop a link in the chat where we can do an anonymous feedback on what this prompt is going to tell us. So because of my gender, I was or I am told I can't do X. So Hitesh, if you don't mind, you can drop the link in the chat and people can go in and fill out this link. And then we'll start seeing what our different perspectives or experiences have been dealing with gender. Or if you're having issues interacting with Menti, you can also simply go in and put it even in the comment section. Any is welcome. I'm already saying something. I can't go out too late. Very similar to me. I can't express emotions. Any others? That I was weird, or to not play football, that I should not have babies. Very different, pieces of feedback. I can't cry. I feel like a lot of men will, empathize with that. Faria in the comment section is saying, I can't ride a bicycle. I hope you completely pushed back on that notion, Faria. Great. And so many different things coming up here. I'm going to move us on to our next creative, warm-up, which is, if you don't mind, Hitesh, moving on to the next slide, about the feelings that we get or the feelings that are elicited when people talk about gender. So if you're, the prompt is going to be very similar to this one. Talking about gender feels like dash. Talking about gender feels like dash. So you'll go in back to the link that Hitesh had dropped, and you can fill in your, your responses to this prompt. Talking about gender feels like dash. And also feel free to use the comment section in the chat as well. I like Sonia's prompt here around woodwork for boys and girls for knitting, and she definitely would have wanted woodwork. So I love this, what we're seeing on screen. Talking about gender feels like freedom, evidence. Curious to know what that means about evidence. Evidence that, some of the conversations are working. Talking about gender feels necessary. Completely agreed. Ooh, talking about gender feels like pressure. Is it pressure to perform? Is it pressure to feel a certain way? Is it pressure to, include others? I'm curious to hear what that pressure feels and what it looks like. Talking about gender feels like it's difficult. Exactly. And that's why earlier on, when we prefaced this conversation, we say that this would be a brave space and a safe space. So for us to really bring to the surface what are our different experiences with gender, is really all about. So for us to have open conversations to really push the work forward. It feels like a debate, yeah. It feels like, men versus women, boys versus girls. So very interesting perspectives there. Great. So I love this, and I love that we've really started getting comfortable about talking about gender. And so, as we're transitioning to the next part of our slide, Hitesh, if you don't mind, we want now to get into a point where we're talking about the gender foundations. And no better person to set us up than this quote from one of my really favorite authors, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie from Nigeria. And she says that the problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. And this is really defined by social norms and gender norms and the barriers that exist within the societies that we live in. And of course, we're then boxed into certain ways based on what people perceive or expect us to think or act. And so that means that gender not only affects women, but it also affects men and boys alike. Gender impacts everyone. And so, you look at back to our previous prompt around men are not allowed to cry or show emotion, and women who are very strong willed and in careers that are male dominated, when they're strong willed, they're told to be bossy or, rough around the edges. And so these are some of the things that have been confined by the societies in which we live. And these presumptions are very harmful to us all. And so we really want to start shifting the conversation to gender equality and really bringing in people who have been previously marginalized, previously left on the outskirts, to come into the table and start having this conversation together. So I'm going to hand us over back to Hitesh to talk about intersectionality and what that means for us. Hitesh?
Thank you, Celeste. Yes. So as Celeste said, like how do we bring people who have been historically marginalized into the conversation? Uh, we wanted to show this diagram, which kind of captures like what we say about like gender and what we are calling this term called intersectionality. This diagram looks intense, but like bear with me and we'll spend some time here. And actually, it's like you'll find it actually quite intuitive and easy to use. So, as intersectionality, like formally, this term means any gender is not monolithic. Identities are not equally included or equally excluded. So, what it means is that there is a whole interconnected nature to social identities. There are, and we all live in systems of discrimination that have benefited a certain group over others, and that has put people who are of like women of color, like people who do not know English, or people who are immigrants. So people who you see in this diagram are, it says, on the outer circle, like in the they have been historically marginalized, and that has really like shifted the level playing field. Like when you are starting from, when the level, when the playing field is not equal, then it's really difficult for someone or from that marginalized set of groups to actually rise. So how do we expect groups to like say, oh, everyone is equal, when actually no, actually no one, people aren't really equal. So this diagram really does a great job of showing where does the power lie and who does not have power. So how do you think about identities through the lens of gender and through the lens of all the different intersectional identities that come through it? So we calling it different slices of the cake. So the term originally was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and she assessed the experience of Black women at the overlap of gender and race. The more that gender is integrated without considering these intersecting identities, the greater the risk of further marginalizing or further like perpetuating the systems of oppression, and further in over time, like further perpetuating inequality. So how do we design things that can allow, for example, like I can take a piece of the cake here, like how do we design for like what how do you design differently for someone who's a citizen versus an immigrant? How do you design now if that immigrant is also a female and is also of like, let's say, another, like does not know the language English or French and is divorced? So like do you see how suddenly these identities start to get more complex, and how we owning these identities can start to like create so much more further marginalization. So how do we design for actively for people who are who are intersecting in all these identities? So we really use this diagram as kind of our uh, baseline for understanding, hey, what are the identities that might be at play when we are working on a project, and then how do we actively consider those identities when we are designing for everyone. So let's I'll we'll come back to this over and we'll practice what that looks like in the our practice exercise. But I'll pass the baton to Celeste to continue walking us through the next section.
Thank you, Hitesh. I think I love how you really go and simplify that very um, complex diagram. So when we're looking at transformative solutions, what does that mean to us? So these are solutions that really address the root causes of inequality amongst genders and helps us break down those barriers and really design for all. And so we'll go into just sort of talking about one of the people who we have designed for in the past and how her future should be replicated across board. So Hitesh, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide. So we'll introduce you to Hira. Hira is one of the women or the archetypes that we met when we were doing the Women and Money work. And this is a program that we've been working closely with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to really try and surface the inequalities and challenges that face women as they access digital financial services. And so Hira is a very accomplished woman. She's educated, she's smart, she's a leader within her community. She's finished school, she has a technical degree, she works and she's able to also be a mother, a wife, and she's also able to bring in home the bacon and able to bring in part of the family's income. And so she really is a shining star in the community amongst her peers and amongst other women. Hitesh, next slide, please. But if we look at Hira, she didn't get here on her own. She is a byproduct of people who have believed in her over the period of time that she's been alive. And she's also been able to tap into support systems that exist within her ecosystem and within the communities in which she lives. And so as a result, she's been able to go back to school. She's encouraged to finish her education. She's been able to marry a man who sees her as an equal partner. She's been able to tap into the care and support of her community, and so she's able to raise her children while still working. And she's also able to be part of the national dialogue and have people push that dialogue on her behalf about the importance of investing in girls. And so really this is a combination of different factors coming in together to really support Hira to get to her absolute best or to reach her potential. So if we're looking at this as innovators, this is the future of Hira, but it can be the future of many women that we're designing for in the different fields of work that we're working on or in the different projects that we're focusing on right now. And so we want to see what this means for us as innovators. So I'll hand us back over to Hitesh to really get us into exercising that muscle and really trying to understand how we can apply these principles in the work that we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Celeste. So yeah, so like what does this mean for us as innovators? Like, how do we like what role can we play as in as active agents for gender equality? And how can we make our like gender solution how can we make every solution a gender transformative solution? So as we said in the beginning, every project can be a gender project. So be it climate, like I'm working on an agriculture project or I'm working on a climate change project. It was like, oh, there's gender does not feature on that project like on first glance, but like probably you might see that actually gender plays a big role in every even if it's not like directly you can't see the connection. So um every project can be gender transformative, and what we say, like if you do not consider like gender as a factor, what it means is that you're probably designing to reinforce or you're working within those current like capitalist or patriarchal systems. And gender needs to be everywhere, or else people risk being left behind or harmed. Like there is like not only could you be neutral, but you can even cause unintentional harms and not set up the succeed, not set up for people who have been left behind to succeed the same way as men have. So I don't know if some of you guys might know Mary, who's our program design director, and she was working on the Women in Money project with BRAC, and she coined this term, and I love saying this, and like all of us in our organization have stuck to it. It's like if we design for everyone, we invariably start we only design for men. so so how do we actively design for gender is an important task for us. So gender transformative solutions, as just to reinforce the term, is like solutions that are those that dismantle the power dynamics and structures that reinforce gender inequality. And as innovators, we have a lot of responsibility to 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 make sure that we are not perpetuating those systems. So how do we put that to practice? Like this is great in theory, like, oh yeah, we would all love to do this thing and we would all love to, make sure we are not causing any harms. So we have developed some simple frameworks and exercises for us to help design solutions for all genders. And these are all, as I said in the beginning, like these are things that we are also testing and practicing within the group. So would love, like, if you see like, hey, there's a way to improve this, like do give us feedback. So what does that look like in practice? Sorry, 1 second. Oh, wow. There you go. So this is the centerpiece or the piece de resistance of our frameworks that we use, which we call the Continuum for Gender Transformative Design. And what that means is, that when we actively design for gender, we can create transformative impacts that can really start shifting the norms that exist in the society. So I will spend some time here and we'll walk through each of them, like what does gender neutral, what does each of these paths mean, and then we will actually put it to practice and test this framework out together. So when we say gender negative solutions are those that uphold the gender inequalities by reinforcing harmful gender norms. So for example, like saving tools for dowry, like it's actually reinforcing gender inequality. So, dowries keep girls away from school and treat them as property. So a gender negative space might not allow women and girls in the decision making areas or consider some activities only for men, especially those deemed typical to masculinity without reason to include others. So that's gender negative. Now, what is gender neutral solutions? Gender neutral solutions are those that maintain the status quo by failing to recognize or address the gender norms and roles and stereotypes that are upholding that gender inequality. So for example, again, I'm going to go back to the savings tool and say that, oh, this savings tools is available to everyone. But when you're designing it, like you're not considering that, women do not have access to a mobile phone, or they don't have a government ID in the country, or they might have different literacy rates. So this savings tool might be working extremely well for men, and you'll see a lot of uptake for men, but like you're leaving the women behind, and the access to finances and making financial decisions, that gap keeps increasing. So a gender neutral space might be open and available to anyone who walks in, but with no consideration of gender. So but women, girls, non-binary people might not be able to access these spaces at all. So how do we think? So this is when we say gender neutral, it's like completely failing to recognize that, hey, gender is playing a role there. Now, what does if you move to the slightly more right of this spectrum and talk about what does gender sensitive mean, or some people also in some frameworks call it gender responsive. That means that when solutions are carefully considering gender issues and address these within the existing norms, including by proactively centering those with less power within them to promote gender equity. And these, you would see like a lot of this shows up gender sensitive work we try to achieve in, BRAC does a lot of projects that do try to get there. And, we in our at idea.org are also trying to practice things. We are aiming for gender transformative, but in reality, sometimes we just stay in the gender sensitive space. So what does that look like? It's like, what that means is, we are designing things that can allow for unique gender based needs. So like maybe provide transportation support or financial assistance to access that savings tool we've been talking about. Or, or like, how do girls and non-binary people see themselves in, like, in terms of, like, what agency do they have in terms of decision making within the households? Or like, is there a accountability mechanism to protect against harassment or discrimination that might happen? So how do we start thinking about those intersectionality, that diagram we showed, when we are designing a savings tool for people? So that's what we call gender sensitive. Now, and then our, sweet spot and our big goal is, how do we get to gender transformative solutions? That, I mean, gender transformative solutions are those that really start to transform power dynamics and structures that maintain gender inequality. So for that, it really requires, think outside the box of what we are used to. So, how do we start to ensure that, diverse representation is happening and gender norms are starting to be questioned and starting to change actively? So for here, we want to avoid as much to go into the gender negative or the gender neutral spaces in our solutions. And sometimes our winning aspiration is gender transformative, but, gender sensitive might be the scope of sometimes of our project. And that's okay. Like, this is as we said in the beginning, this is a learning curve, and gender is a muscle we are trying to practice. So what we like to call it is like, how do we keep nudging our solution to keep going towards the transformative space? And like over time, it starts to influence the social dynamics. So I'm going to walk us through an example of a solution that has, kind of transcended through this continuum, and that might help put this to like uh, practice in terms of how it looks in reality. And then we will all practice it together. All right. I know this was a lot of like heavy, intense frameworks, but bear with me. So I want to show you guys this example that we personally love a lot in idea.org, and we love talking about it. And it's this project by Helen Keller International, and they did a project in Burkina Faso for like homestead production and nutrition education. That means, like, how do small, like, people who are using their backyards, or, people who have smallholder farms, like, how can they actually increase production, and, how can they have better nutrition education that leads to, better outcomes for the whole family? So they started off really, like, thinking, oh yeah, this is such a great program. And, like, this started in 2010. It's been a while. So there's like, okay, like, they did the user research, they did, the whole like spiel of, designing completely in a very careful way. And what happened is, like, they saw men were the ones who were working in the farms, and, women were working in the kitchen, and at the home. So they say, okay, we'll train men for farm production, and we will, help women with nutrition education, because that's what we are seeing as the environment that's there in Burkina Faso. What resulted to that was, like, they were really reinforcing the social norms that were already existing there. And what they saw was, like, the program was not even reaching to the women farmers that did exist. And even the nutrition education uptake was so small, like, women weren't interested in, like, learning, because they say, hey, we don't really control the production of what comes out, so how can we talk about nutrition? So they realized, oh, actually we need to start, influencing how can women be part of more of the, production, and how we can reach more women. So they had a personal check-in, all of them, and they redesigned the program that got them to a slightly more gender-neutral space. So what they started doing was, they learned that, it's really important to engage women actively in production, not just nutrition education. So they started to redesign their program, in a way that targeted women especially, and they started negotiating with. What they started to find out is that, oh, women are not really allowed to own land, or women are not really don't have access to, like technology, information, or literacy to even, start practicing modern techniques of agriculture. So what Helen Keller International started doing was they started talking to community members on like how can they like they started creating what they call like community model farms, where they started negotiating with the communities that, hey, we want this land, and started helping women acquire land for farming. And that started to shift things slowly. And what happened was, suddenly, they started creating a new model for communal like model farm, and they started actively giving inputs for technology and training and nutrition of food crops, and even doing some small livestock farming to women especially. And they explicitly started doing project activities geared towards women. And what that started to do is, when like people in the community started seeing that, oh, like women are doing badass job at the farm, they are creating more, production than anyone, and it's also like really upping the nutrition of everyone. So like, oh wow, that's really great. So like suddenly the community's view of, like rap of gender norms started to change. They're like, oh, women can actually work in the farm. Women not just can work in the farm, they can create more wealth, and they can actually own these farms. So that really started, that was one of the big norms that started to change in Burkina Faso. And over time, uh, they started to see way more impact of, like, within the span of 2 years of them implementing this program, more nutrition uptake. There was more like just like gender norms around women participating more in agriculture, and just like it started to disproportionately create amazing outcomes for women. So this is one example of a journey of a project that led from, a space that was really reinforcing gender norms and being in the gender negative space, to actually starting to create more gender transformative solutions. So this is a small example of Helen Keller International, and now I want us to practice together how we can imagine gender transformative solutions together as a group of innovators. So we have an activity lined up for us that we will go into breakout rooms and do together. I think we have 20 minutes left. And what we want to do is we'll go into breakouts, and we have put out some like very like app like uh, products, digital solutions that exist out in the market right now. A chat platform, an e-commerce platform, a microfinance service, or a Kiko agent. And we want all of you guys to, in breakout rooms, discuss how can you make a chat platform gender transformative. It's like, oh, how can a chat platform be gender transformative? The answer is yes, it can be. So like, let's talk about like how we can make push all these solutions, an e-commerce platform or a digital microfinance product into those gender transformative space. So we will spend let's spend like, how about like 10 minutes going into the breakout, and then we would love to hear your ideas and your reflections after 10 minutes in the breakout room. I'm gonna share the link of this deck if you guys want to play around in the deck itself. And so there are copies of the deck, a slide, and you should be able to edit them. So feel free to use this deck in the slides number 24. Like towards the end of the deck, you will see places to, like, start moving this around. So have fun with this, and welcome back, everyone.
We were in the middle of a very exciting discussion, so we abruptly came to this room, but we were kind of scratching our heads to figure out those transformative aspects. Yeah.
Can't wait to hear all about it.
Well, do you want to share, Salman, with the group, with all of us, like, how did it feel? Well, like, which product you were working on, and what were some of your ideas?
Sure, we can start. So we were discussing about the chat platform, right? And we see there are different implications, because female clients or women, they kind of take a lot of e-commerce services. Or for an example, there are different dating platforms that are available there. So basically we were discussing about these two cases, where in certain matchmaking platforms, where we see that there is a women consent that comes while you start the conversation and everything, right? So this is very, we think this is very unique in a sense that women can start the conversation, and then these conversation can go on. So the first priority is with them. So that is one. And also in the e-commerce space, we are seeing that female clients, they take a lot of different services, a lot of you want to buy a lot of clothes and so on through social medias and everything. So we see that the response that comes, typically it's a very much an automated response, but is there any way we can make it more gender specific response, right? Or whether there could be like helpline support where female representatives can talk, so that the female clients become more confident. And at the same time, if you can also see that if there are certain regulations that can come in, where these information, for example, I'm sharing my address, my sharing my contact address, so these things can be kind of protected into this system or message. Like in WhatsApp there is a encrypted version of it. So if there is any way we can also do this sort of stuff, so that the female client become more trusted, and they can uh, rely on these services. So yeah, these are some of the things we were discussing. So yeah.
I
Yeah,
love
one
the
thing one thing I'd like to point out is that, in fact, and the dating app discussion that came from a comparison between Tinder and Bumble, where in Bumble, even after a match, it's only the woman who gets to send the first message, and that can actually be considered gender transformative, because the traditional idea of dating is that men make the first move. So that is essentially a transformation. So that's the one thing that we thought was, transformative in nature.
That's a great example, Kazi. I think thinking about how do we like give him more control and agency to in these conversations, and then also starting to think about, as you said, Salman, like how do we think about risks and privacy, and and like how do we make sure like people feel safe when they are on these chat platforms. I think those are very important things to think about, and it's going in the right direction of nudging people towards gender transformative space. Celeste, did you want to add something?
Can we add? Okay.
Go for it, go for it.
No, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so we were also discussing about a chat platform, and while we were striving to have a definition for what a chat platform could constitute, we were discussing about how, related to what you just said about control, so controlling the kind of conversations which take place. So we were discussing how a moderator could be present, who can actually be trained to be more gender sensitive and to give, let's say, equal opportunities for men and women to speak, or write, or so having that kind of a welcoming environment, whether it's online or physical. So yeah, and then the breakout session stopped, so we couldn't continue.
No, those are great concepts, Nanjiba. And I think we don't have to stop this conversation. With these
Right.
conversations can continue. These are like that's the point of this framework and this tool, is to really like ignite, spark discussions within design teams to like, hey, like how do we actually push our solutions to gender transformative space. So I would invite you guys all to, sorry, I'm going to share my screen again. I would invite you guys to try these tools out with your own team. And we have a gender in design toolkit that we have developed at idea.org, that is a starting point for any design team to start practicing gender transformative solutions. And this is something that's open source, so feel free to like access it. And then the second toolkit, it's like idea.org worked with, is designing for digital confidence, which is another great starting point for teams to start thinking about it. So This tool is also free and widely available online. So feel free to use these two and let us know how it feels to be designing for gender and practice your gender muscle. Celeste, before any parting words?
None. I've really enjoyed moderating this session. And as Hitesh has mentioned, the conversation doesn't have to end here. So if you have any feedback for us, we'd like to continue the conversation aside from this forum. Happy to do so. And, thank you to the BRAC team for allowing us this opportunity to come and share some of the tools that we've been working on, and looking forward to hearing more about how you're using it, and also seeing you in the next few sessions across the 2 days.
Thank you, friends.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. It was a very quick and very thought-provoking exercise, and definitely will help all of us, in any kind of approach in designing different interventions. And definitely we will be more conscious and intentional in looking for these, gender transformative solution. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. See you, friends. Bye.